On April 9, 1865, in the quaint village of Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, two rival generals convened to deliberate the fate of an army that had endured 4 arduous years of conflict. Confederate Commander Robert E. Lee sought a meeting with Union General Ulysses S. Grant upon realizing that his forces could no longer sustain the fight. This moment has been historically recognized as the conclusion of the American Civil War. However, the circumstances surrounding this meeting unveil a more intricate narrative regarding how the war ultimately reached its conclusion. Before we proceed, please subscribe to Civil War Historian, where we delve into the lesser-known aspects of the events that have shaped our world. In early April 1865, Lee's army was under immense strain. Union forces had successfully breached Confederate defenses during the prolonged Siege of Petersburg, which had exerted significant pressure on Confederate resources. With the collapse of those defensive lines, the Confederate capital of Richmond could no longer be safeguarded. Government officials swiftly evacuated the city, prompting Lee to order his army to retreat westward across Virginia. The objective of this maneuver was straightforward. Lee aimed to reach supply depots located further inland and potentially join forces with other Confederate units still active in the southern states. If these armies could merge, the Confederacy might still prolong the war, despite the escalating pressure from Union forces. However, the situation was evolving more rapidly than Lee had foreseen. Union Commander Grant recognized that Lee's army was the most formidable Confederate force remaining in the eastern United States. Capturing and compelling that army to surrender would significantly diminish the Confederacy's capacity to conduct large-scale operations in that area. Consequently, Grant instructed several Union armies to pursue Lee and obstruct every conceivable escape route. Cavalry units advanced to intercept supply wagons, while infantry forces maneuvered along parallel roads to obstruct Lee's anticipated route. As the retreat progressed, Confederate soldiers began to experience the repercussions of these tactics. Acquiring supplies became increasingly challenging. Food was in short supply, ammunition was limited, and prolonged days of marching started to wear down the army. What commenced as a strategic withdrawal gradually transformed into a race against an adversary that seemed to emerge on every road ahead. By the time Lee's army neared the vicinity of Appomattox Courthouse, Union forces had already begun to position themselves along the road heading west. Lee still held on to the belief that there might be one last chance to escape. If his troops could breach the Union cavalry that was guarding that road, the army could potentially continue its retreat southward, where additional Confederate forces were still operational. On the morning of April 9th, Confederate troops initiated an assault aimed at clearing the path ahead. Initially, the plan seemed to be successful. Confederate soldiers advanced and managed to push back the Union cavalry defending the road. For a fleeting moment, it appeared that Lee's army might finally secure a route for escape. However, the situation shifted rapidly. Behind the cavalry line were thousands of Union infantry soldiers who had arrived during the night. These troops were part of larger Union formations that had quietly positioned themselves while Lee's army readied for its attack. As Confederate officers surveyed the battlefield, it became evident that they were not confronting a minor defensive force. Instead, a fully organized Union army now stood directly in their way. When Lee received these reports, the gravity of the situation became undeniable. His army was encircled. Fresh Union troops obstructed the road ahead, while additional Union forces were advancing from other directions. Continuing the battle would almost certainly lead to significant casualties without providing any genuine prospect of success. Lee had dedicated 4 years to leading his army through some of the most intense battles of the war. Now he confronted one of the most challenging decisions of his military career. Rather than risk further losses among soldiers who had already faced years of conflict, Lee opted for a different course of action. He dispatched a message requesting a meeting with Grant to discuss the terms of surrender. Grant had anticipated this possibility. For several days, Union forces had been advancing during what became known as the Appomattox Campaign. At last, the moment Grant had been striving for had arrived. Later that day, the two generals convened inside a private residence in the village of Appomattox Courthouse. The house belonged to a local resident named Wilmer McLean. During their discussion, the two commanders deliberated on the terms that would enable Lee's army to lay down its arms and conclude the campaign. Grant proposed relatively lenient conditions. Confederate soldiers would surrender their military equipment but would be permitted to return home after pledging not to take up arms again. Many soldiers were also allowed to retain their horses, which were vital for farming once they resumed civilian life. These terms contributed to ensuring that the surrender would occur peacefully and without further conflict between the two armies. Lee's surrender signified the downfall of the most significant Confederate army operating in the eastern United States. News of the event disseminated rapidly throughout the nation, leading many Americans to perceive it as the onset of the war's concluding phase. However, the Civil War did not come to an immediate end following that meeting. Other Confederate forces remained operational in various regions of the South, and several commanders would capitulate their troops in the weeks that followed. Nonetheless, the gathering at Appomattox swiftly evolved into the emblematic representation of the war's resolution. What commenced as a frantic withdrawal across Virginia culminated in a dialogue that altered the trajectory of American history. The surrender of Lee's army signified the point at which the Confederacy's capacity to persist in the conflict began to disintegrate. Although the narrative is frequently oversimplified, the occurrences at Appomattox stand as one of the most pivotal moments in the annals of the United States. If you found this narrative engaging, please share in the comments what captivates you the most, and ensure you subscribe to Civil War Historian for further insights into the events, choices, and overlooked aspects that have shaped our history.